I would say we're kind of starting with like a basic understanding. So if there, like Maddie said, if there are additional questions or you just need to know more or need links or things, just definitely reach out. All right. Maddie, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So this is us. My name is Maddie Donovan. I have been a job coach at VCU RRTC for the past 6 years. I started out with our Medicaid waiver services and supporting young adults with employment in that area. And then I moved on to our project search at St. Mary's Hospital and supported, it's our internship school to work program. And I was there for about 4 years until eventually moving on to our customized employment study that we're doing at VCU, and also with Business Connections, which Jenica and I will talk about. And this is my new puppy, Koa. So we're a little obsessed with our dogs. Jenica and I had our dogs meet the other day, and it was really funny, a little bit of a mess, but they're really cute together. So we wanted to include them in our slide.
Yeah, a little get to know you. But yeah, as Maddie said, we're a little bit obsessed. So we hope there are some more dog lovers out there. I'm Jenica Johansson. I am an employment specialist at VCU's RRTC. I started about 7 years ago on the business connection side. I stayed over there for a couple of years, went to customized employment, and like Maddie said, we're kind of doing both customized and business connections right now. I'm also, I participate in the Dominion project that we've started. And I'm originally from New Hampshire. I came down here about 10 years ago and got sucked in. And like Maddie said, this is Millie. And she's about 1.5 years, but she kind of stopped growing at puppy size. So I say I have a forever puppy, but we're definitely obsessed.
Yeah.
So we're going to do just kind of an overview. We're going to, we had our introduction. We're going to do the bulk of our presentation on supported employment. And then we're going to touch briefly on DARs, how you would go about approaching them, what services. And then at the end, we're going to leave time for questions. So I know Katie is monitoring the chat. So you can put things in there, but also feel free to save them until the end when we can actually have a back and forth conversation about it.
So here are some frequently used acronyms. I think a lot of times in this field and many fields, we use a lot of acronyms and don't always realize that other people don't know what we're talking about. Took me a while, even ESO, I don't automatically associate that with an employment services organization. So we wanted to provide this. I know that this is recorded and then you guys will also have access to the slides afterwards. So we thought it would be helpful just to kind of have some of these acronyms in here. VCU RRTC is where Jenica and I both work, which is Virginia Commonwealth University Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. And then DARS is one that we're going to be talking about a lot too, and that's the Department of Aging and Rehabilitation Services. And then support employment, we don't really use SE in our slides, but that's what we're talking about with that. So, and then of course, person with a disability, person without a disability is another acronym that we'll use.
Yeah, that definitely, when I first started in the field, that was something where I had to have a notebook next to me at all times, kind of jotting down acronyms and looking them up later. And I know as a caregiver or family member, that can probably be pretty intimidating when the state agency counselor or, service providers are just throwing around some of those acronyms. So this is just a couple of the more widely used ones, but then you'll see once we get into later slides that there are a couple more. So you'll see, this is just to kind of set up what we're looking at for the whole labor force right now. So for people without a disability, like you can see here, the unemployment rate is nearly twice for people with a disability than it is for people without a disability. And then in terms of actual employment, this is for ages 16 and up. So this does include that 65 and older group, which there is additional numbers for 16 to 64, so that main working age. And it's just adding a couple percentage points onto each of these numbers. So there is a slight difference in that, but we included the total because that's the numbers that you'll see most often. And so we wanted to keep it consistent. So you'll see here, there's a huge discrepancy. And these are the statistics as of they published them this February and they're for 2020, so they are current. So we're looking at, a huge discrepancy here. So supported employment is kind of our way of approaching that to narrow that gap between the two.
This is our mission at VCU Business Connections. And so that is where we do our supported employment, our ESO. So that's our employment service organization. So Business Connections at VCU, this is our mission. So what we really focus on, we want real work for real pay. So we want employment for people with disabilities to be in the community, so fully integrated alongside coworkers without a disability. It should be competitive employment. So receiving a wage that is at least minimum wage or higher. But really, we also want to consider that that employee is getting the same as much as their counterpart that does not have a disability. And so we need to make sure that when we are focusing on employment, that it encapsulates all of those things. So this is our mission at VCU, providing person-centered and customer-directed, supported and customized employment services, and helping people obtain and then also retain their employment.
And I will say, Maddie, you mentioned ESO in there. I don't think we mentioned the connection between. So an ESO, an employment service provider, is a vendor for the state. So there are several of them within Richmond, but essentially we get referrals. An ESO gets referrals from the state. And so you work in tandem, and then we provide the services. So when we talk about DARS later, that's kind of that relationship. And that's where you'll hear ESO, that term mostly, is that relationship between the two. So our vision is just closely linked to our mission, but integrated competitive employment. And our vision is to make that a reality for any individual, and especially to focus on their strengths. So not like a deficits-based approach, but looking for that integrated competitive employment with a focus on identifying and optimizing their strengths. So go for it.
So this is just kind of a progression of where we've come. So in the beginning, there was no work for people with disabilities. Then we moved into sheltered workshops, which is where someone is working alongside with other people with disabilities, and oftentimes they are not receiving minimum wage. It's based on like production and what that person puts out. So that would not be considered integrated employment. And then move on to enclaves. And so same, very segregated employment for people with disabilities. And then community integrated employment. And now we are at an emphasis on supported, customized, and self-employment, which has been really great. Jenica and I both have a background in that supported employment. And then now we also are working on this customized study. And it's been really neat to kind of see the different experiences and work with people in the within the community to create customized jobs for people with disabilities and really build a profile of, what their interests are, what their abilities are, and making sure that fits their abilities, but also matches with the employer. And so it's also been neat to hear different stories about people with their self-employment. And so this is the progression so far, but of course we still have a lot of work to do, which is probably why we're all here today. And so we also recognize that and are excited about the future with all the work that's being done.
Yeah, just 2 comments on that. I feel like the way that I view kind of the history of it, it was like no work, and then you're working, but you're only with other people with disabilities that they put somewhere together. And then they thought, okay, well, they want to be in the community. So they took those small groups and they brought them into a business in the community, but they're still really just only working with people with disabilities. And then we kind of moved to more individualized. I think something really interesting that Maddie and I have found in working on the customized project and coming from a supported employment background is that when supported employment is done well, there's a lot of elements of customized employment in there. But what we found is that for true customized employment, there is a greater focus on that initial work, that discovery with the individual, which it holds a greater emphasis than simply supported employment. So you may not be jumping right into looking for a job right away, but you're creating that base for a better fit and a better job match later on. So it's just a different approach. I don't think either is worse or better than the other, but it is interesting to look at kind of the differences.
Yeah, it's very individualized and based on the person and, what their support needs are.
Yeah. So the process of supported employment, these are some other terms that you will see acronyms of all over once you get into looking for a job, either for yourself or for your individual. So situational assessment is also known as work experience. They can kind of be used interchangeably. And that is where we are assessing a lot of different factors. We'll go into it a little bit later. That's before we're actually looking for a job. So then we go into job development, and that's where we're applying, interviewing, doing all of that, networking with employers. And then we go into job site training, which is actually where we go on site with the employee for orientation and training shifts, and we learn alongside with them. And then we get to follow along, which is where stability has been reached, and we start to put a fading plan in place. So that's just the progression of those services that would be provided in supported employment.
And these coincide too with what DARS, when we are receiving support from DARS or getting that referral, they'll be the people that we're working with will be referred to us either in situational assessment, job development is usually the two that people are referred to us. And then these different titles also match up for the different stages that DARS uses as well for that process.
And it can be a little bit confusing because you can't be in two services at once. So you have to kind of work with that counselor to determine where is the appropriate place to go into services, because you can't be doing situational assessments and doing job development at the same time. So that's where that communication really needs to come into play with that DARS counselor.
So what is a job coach anyways? I'm sure you're all wondering. So a job coach is somebody who is supporting the person and getting that positive job match. So that's step one. Well, I guess step one is really discovering that person's interests and abilities, and then working with them to get that positive job match. And then we also do that on the job training and making sure that we're identifying and supporting our client based on their strengths, and creating any kind of supports and helping them master those tasks. So our goal and what we really want to be looking towards is independence. And so when we go into a job site, we are thinking about, okay, what are some strategies that we can put in place with the support of an employer, with the information that we've gathered during situational assessment to really help people be successful at work, and allow them that independence. And so those are a lot of the supports that we put in place. And we'll talk a little bit about those. That's always my favorite thing to do. I love creating different supports, and really kind of figuring out what is going to help that person become independent at work. And there's a lot of stuff that we use, phones and our calendars and stuff. We use a lot of these strategies. It's really just putting them in place and helping people identify which ones are going to work best for them, because it's going to look different. So they're very individualized. And then, of course, we collaborate with the job seeker and the employer, DARS, and the support network. So that includes anyone that's identified within the person that we're supporting within their support network. So that can be, family members or people that they're including throughout this process.
Yeah, we're kind of that focal point in between all those players of kind of looking that employment search. And so it can be kind of frustrating, but it also is really helpful to just have that one person that kind of does that case management. Another thing that I would mention is that in some organizations, they kind of separate some of the elements of the job coach role. So sometimes they'll have somebody who works directly with the individual, doing that direct service from a job coach perspective. And then they'll have somebody separate doing job development, which is networking with businesses and things like that. Within the RRTC, we all do everything. So we don't segment that position. So when we get a client, a consumer, we are with them for the life of that, because we think that when we separate some of those elements of the job coach role, some things can get lost in the shuffle and in between. So maybe that job developer knows the needs of the business really well, but they only have a surface understanding of the individual. So we find that when we can combine those two in one, it's a little bit more difficult, but at the end we find better job matches. So we touched earlier on situational assessments. Essentially, this is the opportunity for a client to participate in a work experience in an integrated employment setting. So this is going into an actual business who has actual tasks that need to be done. And we're able to let that, the goal is to just kind of observe and note certain things. Sometimes they need more support than others. But you'll see here listed all of the different topics that we will assess during these work experiences. It's exposure to new environments. How do they interact with a customer that comes up? How do they interact with a coworker? How do they pick up the tasks? How quickly do they fatigue? All of these things, can they get by with just a verbal prompt? Do they need hand over hand demonstration? All of these different things we are really, really helpful, and they create not only how we look for a job in job development, but more so how we're going to support that individual, like Maddie mentioned, during job site training with compensatory strategies and physical supports and things like that. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I think situational assessment too, when we are going into these different environments, we want them to be matching what that person is interested in. And I think a lot of times what we find in situational assessment is, valuable to know what that person enjoys and what they like about the assessment. But sometimes it's just as valuable to learn that they don't like this. So I've worked with somebody in the past when they really wanted to get into childcare and loved babysitting their nieces and nephews. But then when we actually went to a child care facility and did an assessment, it's very different when you're watching someone else's kids or kids that you don't know as well. And so that changes things a little bit. And that's okay. That's good. We want to know that before we're really jumping into locking in a position with an employer, because that really helps guide where we're going to go. And so eventually that person realized that childcare wasn't really for them. And sometimes knowing what somebody doesn't like is just as valuable. And I did want to mention too, when you were talking, Jenica, about how at VCU we go through all the stages with the person that we're supporting. One thing that's come up from just doing the different courses that VCU offers with support employment, at VCU, we kind of use the words to describe a job coach. We kind of put them all together, but different agencies might use employment specialist or a job coach, and they can mean different things within the agency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did want to mention that too, because I think sometimes that can get confusing because we do use them interchangeably, but we use employment specialist and a job coach interchangeably at VCU. So I wanted to point that out too, just in case anyone is from somewhere else and or has had experience with a different ESO that uses a different distinction for their job coaches.
Yeah. And Maddie, I love what you said earlier about not only determining what they like, but also what they don't like, because a lot of individuals with disabilities have a poverty of experience where they just really haven't been exposed to much. And so what we find when we are doing some initial discussions is that when they're asked what they'd like to do or what they're interested in or what types of tasks, really what they'll mention is what they've done maybe through a schoolwork program, or what they've heard the job a friend has, or what a parent has, or a sibling. And so that exposure is so important. And so what we try to do during this assessment is to just get them into new environments that they may have not been exposed to, because I think we hear the regurgitation of just what they've heard of. And it is hard to kind of get creative and think about what you would want to do. So that's another way to kind of get over that hurdle of a lack of exposure and experiences. So we have a case study here, and we're going to be using Veronica kind of throughout some of these stages. This is Maddie's case that we were actually working on. This is like real time. So it's kind of exciting. That was like, this is 2021 case study. So it's, recent. Maddie, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So Veronica is a 26-year-old woman. And when I asked her, I told her that we were doing this presentation, and I asked her how she would describe herself. And she said that she's generally a laid back person, and that like any millennial, she likes to work on her tech. So she's really into her phone and is very gadget savvy. She loves Disney, watches Avengers during her lunch break, is in love with animals, always showing me pictures of her cats, and also loves working with people. And so Veronica actually has been working with VCU for a while. She started out opening a case with DARS in high school and then completed an internship training program at a local hospital. And so that's a part of our project search program that we offer at through VCU RRTC. And so she completed that internship, and then she was able to obtain a job as data entry for a traumatic brain injury grant that they had going, and that only lasted about a year. So after that, she did have some downtime, about a year in between these two jobs, and then started working at a local grocery store. And when she was at the grocery store, there was a lot of turnover with management. And so initially she was going in there to be a cupcake decorator, and was kind of, taking a, what is the word I'm looking for? Like a change. I was trying to find something more creative than change, than data entry, and wanted to be a cupcake decorator. And so she initially, when starting with that employer, they were willing to train her and, wanted to get her into the bakery. But it turned out that they really just kind of had her in the front of the house working to put together groceries for customers. So she was able to really expand on her customer service in that role, but going into it, it was not what she anticipated. So after this lack of opportunity at her previous position, she re-enrolled with DARS and came back to us in our job development, which we'll get to. But this kind of provided our background for Veronica. So we really, since working with Veronica for 4 years, we really know her well and know of her skills and abilities. So we know that she's very detail oriented. We know that she has a great personality and is really skilled in customer service. Just recently, the other day, I saw her handle somebody who was really upset that they could not get something signed. And she explained the protocol to this person and was very concise and was also empathetic, but was also matter of fact and said, this is what happens, and was able to also reassure that person. So in the situational assessment phase, this is when we kind of take together all the information that we've learned about Veronica to then help us guide that job development phase, which we are going to talk about next.
Yeah, and I think for this one, this is a key example of, if you have these past experiences and they're documented and you can get that information, that can help you move more swiftly into job development. If she hadn't had the data entry and the participation in search and the grocery store experience, we probably would have had her in a true situational assessment service code so that we could get her into these places. But, it's almost, it sounds great to be doing all the situational assessments, but if you do have that information, there's no reason to go into situational assessment and delay that process for job development. So job development is, some people love it, some people hate it. I mean, the key is working networks within the community to find a positive job match. And sometimes this can be cold calling and walking into places and asking for positions and asking a lot of questions. And sometimes, like with our case study for Veronica, which we'll show next, you can use your network a little bit better to find a good job match. So as a job coach, you have to use all of those tools at your disposal. And this is also where we get really creative. So you'll hear terms like job carving and restructuring. We did that a little bit with Veronica, which we'll touch on. And then we'll also do employment proposals. So when we do intensive job carving or restructuring, we like to kind of plan that out so that the employer has it. We find that there's greater participation from the employer when we can make things official. And it also is really helpful for them to participate in that process so that we can have their real needs included into the job. Sometimes job development is as simple as applying and interviewing. During this process, the job coach will support the individual with completing applications, buttoning up their resume. If they don't have one, we'll work with them to do so. You can use your job coach as a reference. You can use an old teacher as a reference. So we can get creative in this situation, but the job coach will really be participating as much as is needed. So we have people who want to fill out the applications on their own and want to drive themselves and don't want you to go into the interview. And we have to respect their wishes. In those situations, I think both Maddie and I have done that. We're like, well, we'll sit outside of the room and we'll still be here in whatever capacity you'll let us. So it really is individualized, but we are supporting that individual through the entire process.
Yeah, I think job development is always, it can really encompass a lot of different things because it's just preparation. And so helping somebody understand what is appropriate to wear to an interview, even role playing beforehand is always a great practice, different things like that. And job development is also a time where we can advocate on behalf of somebody to do what we call a working interview. And that's a great tool that we use if a formal sit down interview is not going to show someone's true skills and abilities. So advocating for a working interview allows that person to go in and perform the job and have the employer see them successfully performing the job so that they know that this person is qualified. We know that because of all this work that we've done with them, but it's really a way for the employer to really understand that person's abilities, that maybe a sit down, formal, back and forth reciprocal conversation is not going to show all of their strengths that they have and their abilities in completing that job. So job development is really can have so many different things that's going on during it, but it's the goal is really to support that person in obtaining a successful job match.
Yeah, and Maddie, along with those working interviews, video resumes, that's something we didn't really touch on, but those go kind of hand in hand. It's the same concept of showing your abilities instead of talking about your abilities. And we found those to be incredibly effective.
Yeah, and I think right now too, because a lot of the communication that we have is virtual, having those video resumes, having pictures of that person when they have done a work experience at school, or when they've done an internship in the past or any kind of previous work experience, or I've even had somebody who didn't have a ton of experience in the past, but had an interest in art and shared how he was staying busy during COVID. And those are all things, since we are in a more virtual world right now, and some of our communication has to be either through a Zoom call or, by email. It allows that personalization for the job seeker that we can really show the employer about their interests and different things about them that allows that connection that isn't always happening right now because of the way that things are needing to be virtual right now.
Yeah. So for Veronica, we definitely approached this one using the network. That was kind of, it worked out really nicely to do so. So Maddie had a previous contact from working with a program at least a year or two ago, maybe more. And she kind of reached out and was connected with somebody, that contact connected her with somebody else within the organization that would be a better person to talk to and a better fit for Veronica's skills and interests. And then Maddie and I met with that employer and we discussed potential opportunities. We went in with Veronica in mind and maybe one other person in mind because we weren't sure what opportunities the needs of the business that we were going to find. And so that was another way that you can't really go in with preconceived, notions and ideas of exactly how it's going to go, because we like it to be individualized. If we go in there and it's not a good fit, we want to be able to continue that relationship with the employer. And perhaps, that's the blessing of we have a large staff and we all have our own caseloads, so we can pull from those. But for this one, we went in and it was determined that the opportunities they had within the company were a perfect fit for her, utilizing her customer service skills and her friendliness and her level of respect for customers and individuals. And so we met with them, we identified the position, and Maddie went and spoke with she and her parents. And after additional conversations, it was kind of determined that it wasn't exactly right. Like the role was correct, the tasks were correct, the environment was correct, but the schedule just wasn't going to work for them because they had transportation of a sibling who had to go to school and they lived a little bit farther away. And so at that point, we really had to kind of step back and say, okay, what can we do? This is a great opportunity. We don't want to lose this. We think she's incredible, or she's stated that she is very interested, but what can we do with the employer to make it so this job is viable and a good fit for her? And Maddie actually went back to the employer and had a really great conversation. And it was determined that the employer was open to shifting the timing that she would come in for her shift. And so they adjusted it slightly so that her mom had time to bring her sister to school in the morning. And then she was there for 5 hours or so, and the mom could come pick her up. But if the job coach hadn't provided and facilitated those conversations, this job match probably wouldn't have happened. So, she ended up accepting the position because of those slight tweaks. And that's some of that job carving and customization that a job coach can be a very valuable resource for.
I think it's also valuable to build up trust with the employer too, and having open and honest conversations with the employer just on, it allowed us to talk about, hey, we know that this person is a great match for this position, but these hours aren't working. And so just being able to have that conversation with the employer, I felt comfortable to do that because we had built up some of that rapport, had been established through different meetings, so that we're able to kind of talk to them and negotiate different things with them. And so sometimes it can feel like, okay, I'm reaching out to people. Is this working? What's going on here? And using different networks. And our social network doesn't just include our networks as job coach. It includes, the job seekers. Are they a part of a church? Are they a part of, different activities in the community that we can also kind of capitalize on? And, do they know anybody that's been in this position in the past? Stuff like that. But really kind of establishing that relationship with the employer allows us to then negotiate different aspects of the job. And so, especially in this role, it worked out really well. And I did notice I put Christy was the name I was using for her in the beginning. So that's not her actual name, but then I spoke with her and she wanted to be Veronica. So, but yeah, so having that, establishing rapport really goes a long way with the employer as well. And so that as a job coach, that is a piece of what we do too, is, building relationships up within our local community with different employers so that then they, want to come to us when they do have a job opening. They know that we've had somebody in the past that has worked with them that was successful, does a great job, is reliable. And so, they ask us, do we have somebody that would fit this position? So really kind of establishing that relationship is also a really important piece of what we do.
Yeah, you touched on that network piece of like their church community, other things, there's if the parents are employed somewhere, we have found that if there is some sort of personal connection, the probability that that job goes forward is, so much higher. We had another person that we were looking to get employed, and it turns out he knew the supervisor from a camp 3 or 4 years prior. And that was that little piece of information that made that job match move forward. I touched on where the parent works. That means that sometimes you can't really ask your own employer to hire your kid. But if you have a job coach, a professional coming in and approaching the employer in a professional manner, not as a parent, but in a way that is focused on fulfilling the needs of the business, sometimes that can be a better fit. We've had some success with individuals working in different departments than their parents. They're striving for independence. So sometimes making a placement where their parent works isn't the most successful, but if it's a bigger company and they have multiple departments, sometimes that support, that's not proximal, but that they know is there, can be a really calming factor, and can cut down on some of those barriers. So job site training. So as a job coach, we go on to the site with the individual. We go through, like I mentioned, the orientation. We go through all the training shifts. We learn the job with the employee so that whenever wherever that training stops on behalf of the employer, if additional training is needed, we can fill in. So we kind of provide that support for the employer, and that is definitely a piece that we try to mention during job development, because that can be a big hurdle for employers. They're like, I don't know, I don't think they can do the job. I think they need more training and like more support than I can provide. And that's where we say, hey, we're here. We're not only a resource for the employee, but we're also a resource for you. And Maddie is a supports whiz, so I'm going to let her talk about supports for job site training and things like that. If you want to take that away.
I just really love them. I don't know. I think they're so interesting. I mean, we use like task analysis and really breaking down a task. And I think what I've found over the years is a lot of times we create supports. Of course, we want them to fit the environment. So we want them to be discreet. We want them to be, if it's appropriate to have your phone at work and somebody uses their phone for support, then it's appropriate to have a support on there. And there's a ton of great apps that you can use. Sometimes, like I found a lot of times when we create different like lists and stuff, a lot of times other employees also use them. So we'll post them somewhere and it'll be somewhere discreet, like behind a cabinet of what needs to be socked somewhere, or this is the steps when you have to do this certain task. And it provides an amazing amount of consistency across staff, and employers value that. And so a lot of times I've noticed that these supports then get used by other employees, and the employer, they'll add them into their employee training. So
we had one, Maddie, if I can provide an example for that. We had one client who was working at a hotel, a pretty large hotel downtown, and his reading skills weren't really very strong, but they had a task list on the back of a closet door for their facilities that was just line and line and line and line of reading. So we worked to create a visual support and task list for him, and he was a day shift. He worked during the day shift. What we realized after a few weeks is the employer came to us and said, thank you so much for doing that. Our evening staff, almost all of them, English is their second language. And so that support was so helpful, like Maddie said, to have consistency. We didn't even realize that was something that was going on, that maybe that was why things weren't getting done. But we've noticed that across the board with the day shift and the night shift, we've seen improvement in the performance. So that was, just an example that popped into my head of what you were just talking about.
All right, so next I think we're going to talk about Veronica at work. And I'm keeping an eye on the time.
Oh, these are just two examples, video and just kind of written. So that's another tool that we can use, is actually filming the person doing it. We have some people who don't really respond well to a lot of prompts, and they think it's overbearing and things. And so sometimes we find to film them and them watching themselves do the task just is more impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's Veronica. She is now employed. She is a hospitality aide at a local rehab and nursing center. She uses her clerical and customer skills. She is wearing her mask in the days of COVID and is doing great. She is earning $12 an hour, working 25 hours a week, with the ability to increase her hours if she would like. And so with this job site training, after we did all of the initial application process and she did a working interview, then we went on to our onboarding. So we provide support during that orientation phase, the initial job training, and then creating those individualized job supports. So like I mentioned earlier, the goal is independence. So when we're going into a job, we want to be thinking about making ourselves just not
dependable,
valuable. Yeah, right. Right. So we want to be identifying who is the person, who's the mentor that this person can reach out to, and really capitalizing on those things that we call natural supports within the work environment, and also creating different types of supports that will help them, different tools that they'll be able to use.
So Veronica isn't quite to this step, but the next step after job site training is follow along. So once independence is reached, we introduce a fading plan. This looks different for every single individual and every single job, and it's based off of their ability to reach independence with their tasks and the comfort level of the employer. That being said, when we go into follow along, support doesn't stop. So for RRTC, we provide support for the life of the employment. And that looks like at least 2 check-ins a month. These check-ins can be phone, email, in person. It's really what that individual needs. And one thing that can be a little bit scary for individuals when they go into follow along is, what if something happens? What if I get a promotion? What if there's a change in management, which is what happened with Veronica at the grocery store? What if I just start to not handle my tasks as well when I have long-term independence? What we do is we go back in, we restabilize, and then we try to maybe slowly fade. We'll slow down that process. But it's a fluid movement of events. It's not going to be, oh, we go into follow along and that's it. There is a fluidity to it. Anything else? Okay. So we mentioned earlier.
Yes, this real work for real pay. This is Veronica. I was asking her, told her we're doing this presentation, and this is what she said about her job, that has been great. Working with a job coach has taken a load off her shoulders, and that when we were working together, that we were really using her skill set. And she also likes the serenity of her new job, which is kind of funny because it's very busy. So I think she likes that she can sit down. And it gets really busy at some points, and then there's downtime. So she does her crossword puzzles, but it's pretty busy where she is. But she's doing it.
This is a quote from an employer that we were working with. So the individual they're referring to actually was told by a college professor. It's taken him many, many years to get through his college degree. He's slowly working at it, but he was told about 2 or 3 years ago by a college professor that he would never be employed, that he would never be able to hold a job. And he has been working for one of the Fortune 500 companies here in Richmond for a little over a year now. And he has been brought in on several different projects. He has exceeded expectations on all of them. And he has just been able to power through. And I almost want to go back and find that professor and say, hey, look at this. He's employed. He's making probably more than you are. He's earned raises, and he's, only received positive reviews. But that took working closely with that employer early on so that they got to know him. They got to know what works to support him and what doesn't. But because of that, he's been successfully employed and will continue to be successfully employed with this company, as far as I can see it, for a long time. But this was a quote from his direct supervisor that we actually didn't even seek out. I just randomly got an email one day with this review from him, which was really special. So the bulk of our day is all supported employment, but we recognize that DARS is a really important part of that. And sometimes it can be a little confusing. So we just wanted to touch briefly on some DARS things, Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. So, there we go, DARS eligibility. So these are the 4 elements that you need to satisfy in order to be eligible for DARS. I will say, I'm trying to think how to say this. Don't wait to go and sign up with DARS. Either you get a case open swiftly and you get these services started early and they can get to know your individual, but more often than not, there's a waiting list. And there's order of selection where they take, people who need job site training first, and then job development, and then SA. So I would say don't wait. And even if you're not sure if you meet these requirements, call. So we have contact information later on, but look over these and then reach out to them, and don't wait because it may take a little bit of time. Maddie, do you want to talk a little bit about how we as an ESO collaborate?
Yeah, and I think too now, DARS also is doing pre-ed. So I think it is happening a little bit earlier in Virginia now with the pre-ed services being offered. So usually a DARS counselor is a part of those pre-ed services within school. And so they're coming to those transition meetings, which is great because it kind of creates that continuity of services, because once they're passed over to an adult vocational counselor, they have all that information and we're able to provide that connection, and we have a record of all the stuff that they've done for pre-ed. So that's always really helpful.
And there's going to be a lunch and learn later this month, I believe, on more of that pre-ed age group, I think. So there'll be more on that.
Yeah, and so these are some of the things that we collaborate with DARS. So we do our employment service organization services, and we benefits counseling is great. So DARS will refer you to a benefits counselor that will really help you. I think a lot of times we hear is a concern about benefits being impacted. And so a benefits counseling allows you to really understand what that will look like and how your benefits will be impacted. And also talking to you, I know I've been working with quite a few people that were concerned about, their Medicaid or their health insurance. And so they really have the all the information and provides a list, a scenario of if you make this much, this is what will happen. So it's really helpful to have that. And DARS refers everyone out to make sure that they have, that information from the benefits counseling. And then we do our monthly communication. Jenica and I write case notes daily, anytime we have an interaction. And then we turn them into DARS every month and turn in our billing. But we also are communicating with the DARS counselors throughout the month so that they know what's going on with the services, anything that's come up, any successes. We want to have open communication with our counselors so that it can really truly be collaborative. I've worked with counselors in the past that say, hey, I was thinking about this person and I heard this was going on. Maybe this is something you can check out. And we're always open to receiving that information, and anything that can really promote the success of the job seekers that we're supporting is what we want to be a part of. And then, of course, DARS does offer non-employment related services, which there is probably a very exhaustive list somewhere, but we're really just talking about from our perspective. In the past, AT services, I've worked with someone who DARS created a mechanic so that when he was working as a movie ticket taker, he would just put it slot in. It had a mechanism that would cut it off for him, and then he gave it back to the person. Another person had more of a clerical job, and they made this mechanical wooden thing that would help them fold over the different things that were getting mailed out so that they could then perform that task. And so, DARS will also refer out those services just based on the person.
I would say some of the other ones that they'll provide is, training to obtain your license, other counseling services. There's other things that kind of have to do with them on a more personal level that they can also provide services for. So it's not just employment related. All right, so it doesn't seem to be going. So what we added on here, there is a guide. So we kind of touched on things, but there is a guide that has a ton of information on it. We're not going to pull it up and go through it, but I wanted to include the link so that you could go and review it at a later date. It's a ton of information, what it provides, how to obtain it, all those things like that. So we wanted to include the link. We also wanted to include, I'm not sure if people are mostly Greater Richmond or if they're outside of this area, but we included the DARS central office phone number, their email address, and then the Greater Richmond district manager's name. Like I said, don't wait to contact them, even if it's just information gathering, so you're prepared at a later date. It's always good to get that started early. And that was kind of it. I know we've only got about 10 minutes left. Does anybody, I know the chat was kind of going. I don't know if we want to pull one or two questions or if there's somebody who wants to unmute their camera.
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and just sort of highlight some of the things that we had in the chat session, because there were a few questions. Definitely, we do have, typically on our lunch and learns, we have folks from throughout the state. So it looks like we had some questions about the New River Valley and what services are provided out there. But as I understand it, Business Connections is not providing direct services there. We've worked on some grants in that area, but there are a number of ESOs in that area that the Department of Rehab Services could definitely connect them with. Is that what y'all are
Yeah, DARS is
Mhm.
everywhere. They have offices all over. So they would definitely be the point person to connect you with a service provider.
Yeah, and that was a similar question for the Hampton Roads area. I know I've worked with a number of ESOs in that area, but our staff at VCU doesn't really venture that far down.
Yeah.
60.
Yeah, not really. We do have
Um,
somebody in Fredericksburg, but I don't think we go that far down. And then it just kind of is a little different. And we have different research projects, like you said, but DARS would definitely be the person to go to, the place to
Right.
go.
And there are a number of ESOs throughout the state and some really good ones. And so what we think this will do too is it will provide you some of that information when you're meeting with a new ESO about, what to expect and to ask better questions to understand what their services are as you move forward.
Yeah.
For those
Yeah, that's a
resources.
great point because we can really only speak for ourselves. I've only worked for this service provider. I think Maddie as well. So, we're not speaking for all of the ESOs, but I hope this does provide you with, some information to go and, like you said, ask better questions and know what to advocate for.
Yeah. And somebody was asking about sort of summer employment for students, because a lot of the folks that join us on these lunch and learns are dealing with people that are still in school. And do y'all have an answer for that one for them?
That's what, yeah, I guess I would fall under like seasonal employment, and it's there. I know that I believe that DARS is a part of PREETS. They are doing kind of summer programs specifically targeting students and wanting to get that experience during the summer. Seasonal is always tough with, services because it is for a short amount of time. So really focusing in on those months and doing all of this and then having it only being for a certain amount of time doesn't always allow us to build to that independence. And so I'm not sure in terms of like the employment piece of it, if there was an end date, how that would work with in terms of services with DARS. And that's usually something when I have questions about, I ask a DARS counselor, but I think that PREETS is probably for students. I have worked with students who want to work on the weekends and that want to work on, the evenings. And so, of course, we do provide services because that's still year long. It might not be a full-time job, but it is part-time. And so if they're looking to get that experience outside of school during the school year, then that's definitely something that we have worked with in the past. But
I would definitely, I would definitely say that's when like the relationship with the employer is so important. I think I haven't had this happen specifically with my caseload, but I'm sure, starting a summer job with the understanding with the employer that when school starts, you may back off to like 1 day a week or one shift. I think if it's a good job match and the employer supportive, I think that could be an option. The other thing to keep in mind is trying to work in employment into the IEP so that maybe they can allow 1 or 2 days that you might leave early or something like that to accommodate continuation of employment, because it's so, it's not easy to find a good job match. So if you do find one that you enjoy during the summer, it's a shame to step back from that. So if you can work it in some way, I think it's incredibly helpful.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, what I'm hearing from both of you guys is that probably reaching out to DARS to see if there's any programs that you could apply for and maybe approach it in that respect, starting that application early with DARS. I think that their website says 16 and older. So if you're approaching those ages, that might be a good opportunity to reach out and see what the first sort of steps are. And then also, if you find a job on your own, maybe trying to see if you can incorporate that. One other really great question is in the chat about, it says, how have you been able to overcome the negative effects of the pandemic achieving these networking connections? So I think they're really looking at working with businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been, the pandemic. It's been a pandemic. It's been tough. And I think that that's something, it's really encouraged us to think creatively and, how can we continue this? Because we don't want to lose momentum. So how can we continue these services in a virtual world. And so some of those things like the video resumes, or, I worked with somebody and they came up with a PowerPoint that we used as their resume, and that just kind of talked about what they've been doing recently. I think in terms of contacting employers, any way that we can, and that's really when those like soft connections are like come in, like rather than like the cold calls, you want to have some kind of connection to that employer. And so really capitalizing on our relationships is what has been the most successful, I think, in the pandemic. And I work with someone who would find somebody's mission. And so they would look at the employer's mission and then match it with, our mission, and build a relationship based off of that. And so that was really successful. And so I think, it's really have us had us be creative. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Jenica.
No, I mean, I think during the height of it, we just had to work our network, and, not everybody was hiring. We had to be a little bit more patient. As of late, we've been able to go out into more businesses. We support the clients in terms of mask wearing and things like that. Sometimes 6 feet isn't possible, but we are seeing things open up a little bit. I think I had one other thing to say. Oh, I mean, I've just found that people have to be a little bit more flexible, either in terms of the environments they're willing to work in or the types of roles they're willing to do. Like if you are motivated to get work during the pandemic, you may have to be a little bit more flexible. It may not be your dream job because a lot of people are limiting office numbers and, staff sizes, either to stay afloat or to keep things safe. So being a little bit more flexible on the types of roles that you're open to. That employee that I had the quote from his supervisor, he started in person in January. The pandemic happened in March. He was furloughed. Luckily, they paid his salary, but he didn't have work from March until June. Through that time, I worked with his supervisor to try to come up with a plan for him to potentially work remote. And in June, we got authorization. We got his computer from the office, and he's been working with my support remotely since June. So that's been, that's just an example of a pivot that we've had to make during then. But that networking piece is key, working your relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a good thing that's come out of the pandemic, is that we're a lot more familiar with virtual meetings, and that's become the norm. And in some ways it's created access for people. In other ways, it's become a barrier for some people, but I think, there's someone that I'm working with now, and she lives in a group home and is not able to leave right now due to the pandemic. And so it's created access for her and having a community through the internet. And, the employer is willing to kind of work through some of those barriers that exist since she's not able to leave, and really create like a work from home situation. So everyone's being flexible and, just trying to continue and make some type of progress right now. And I think we've done a good job of getting creative.
And I think it's celebrating those little achievements. Like, don't let those pass you by. If you make a connection and have a good conversation and get an interview, like that is a good step in the right direction. That's practice for, the future. And so, just try to have patience and grace with yourself and celebrate those little milestones.
Most definitely. Well, Maddie and Jenica, we have jammed so much good information into this 1 hour, and I want to really honor your time and hop us off of here. So thank you so much. And just so everybody knows, I dropped the information about next week's Lunch and Learn into the chat. You can click and register right there. And thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We've got our emails on here. Any additional questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.